You are listening to the Palestine in America podcast. The following is the introduction episode to our highly anticipated food edition. In the episodes that follow this one, our guest editor Jinan Deena and I interview a handful of Palestinian chefs you should know. Deena, the creator of Palestinian-themed supper club Bayti, poured a ton of effort and care into curating, reporting, writing, and interviewing for this first-of-its-kind magazine. During this episode of the Palestine in America Food Edition podcast, Deena and I discuss her path to being a chef, the work that goes behind hosting a supper club, and a behind-the-scenes look at the magazine she helped put together. Please consider supporting our work by becoming a subscriber or ordering individual copies of our print or digital magazine at PalestineInAmerica.com. Well, thanks for joining me, Jinan, and also thank you for being the guest editor for the food edition. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's been such an honor, honestly. This has been such a great project.
It's been an honor to work with you and to see what you've come up with, and we'll get into the edition that you curated and that you helped report for and write for and do a ton of work for, especially these other podcast interviews. But to anybody listening, this is the episode to start off with, because we're going to preview the edition. We're going to talk to Jinan about the projects that she's working on and all the great things that she has done. So, but before we get into that, Jinan, we've had you on the podcast before, but introduce yourself and tell our listeners who don't know where you're from.
Okay. Yes, where I'm from. Again, thank you, Nader, so much for this amazing opportunity. Yes, I was on last year in the activist edition. Russia was the guest editor at the time, so I was very honored to be a part of it. And obviously part of the talk that I gave, I talked about how much I love food, which is why I'm guest editing this time around. But so my parents are from Elbira. My dad is from Elbira. My mom is from a small town called Kufr Ana. That's where her dad was raised, but in '67, they were kicked out, lived in Jordan for a few months, and then came back and resettled in Ramallah. That's where my parents ended up meeting. My family is still in Palestine. We're very, very lucky. I've been listening to a lot of the guests on the show whose families were all exiled at some point or another, grew up in Lebanon or Syria, or came to the US immediately. So I know how lucky I still have family in Palestine who have been there, generation after generation. My mom is there right now, actually. She spent the whole summer there, which has been so wonderful for her. And I'm so happy that she was able to have that opportunity. But my dad came to the US in the 70s for school, and then my mom and dad got married in the early 80s. And so my mom came with him at that time. And I grew up in Ohio, small city, Toledo, had a lot of Arabs for how small it was. And yeah, that's where I grew up. We used to go to Palestine in the summers though, and I did live in Palestine for a brief time when I was a teenager. So I'm very familiar with life under occupation, dealing with like the comings and goings through the checkpoints, and understanding from a very young age what it meant to be Palestinian American.
And growing up in Ohio, your parents had a restaurant too, right?
Yeah, so the restaurant actually came later. My dad initially had run a bunch of convenience stores like a lot of other Arab immigrants, self-made entrepreneur. We started the restaurant when we moved back from Palestine in '96, and it was very difficult for my parents because it's hard as Palestinian Americans to, claim your Palestinian heritage, at least back in the 90s it was. And so like a lot of the other podcast members have said, whose families face the same thing, we labeled our food as Lebanese and Mediterranean because it was just so much easier and more palatable. And the food that we served was, some of the food that we ate at home, but a lot of it was just the basics: shawarma, hummus, fattoush, tabbouleh, falafel, gyros. I mean, we had like Greek flair in there. My mom also made like couscous with tajin. But there was also baba ganoush, and there was also like grape leaves, and sometimes she would also make, cabbage rolls, malfouf.
Do you think if you
But
guys had the restaurant today, the marketing would be different?
I definitely would have pushed my parents to market it differently. Yes. I think,
But it has a
a
lot to
lot.
do with where we're at today, right? Like how accepting people are of the Palestinian culture and narrative. Like before, I remember in the 90s, even being in grammar school, like you bring up that you're Palestinian, and the first thing they bring up is, all the negatives about us.
Yeah.
It was very like traumatic as a kid to like have people talk about your people like that, and you being
Yeah.
the only one in your class. So it's like you don't got really anybody sticking up for you.
Not at all. And it's like, there was a lot of stuff going on in the 90s in Palestine. There were a lot of the suicide bombings, and, in the news, it was always framed very negatively. So, yeah, of course, we didn't say that we were Palestinian, but I do know that towards the end, before my parents closed the restaurant, so like post 2010, my parents did start to open up, especially because we had a lot of Jewish customers who came to our restaurant. And so you start to talk, and you start to exchange little bits of your history, and parts of your life. And we had a lot of really great supportive Jewish customers, and a lot of them who were our family and checked in on us when things happened. And I think definitely the narrative, especially nowadays, because of politics and because of the Congress members we've had advocating for Palestine, and social media uplifting Palestinian voices, not just in the activism space, but just Palestinian voices in general. If you're talking about music, if you're talking about, directors and producers of movies, if you're talking about artists, cooks, chefs, whoever, definitely the name Palestine has a different connotation.
Yeah, and which is why, we, make the food edition, we make the music edition to highlight other things outside of, just our oppression. Because even though that is extremely important, we need to
Or
highlight
struggle,
that.
yeah.
But we need to also highlight, that there's much more to our culture than just being occupied. Um, but and I want to get into why you chose certain chefs and why you curated the magazine the way you did. But I also want to highlight what you do, and you host Bayti, which is the pop-up food like brunch, right? And talk to us about that and how the idea came to be, and kind of take us through it, take us through the struggles, the ups and downs of all of it.
Yeah, so, one thing I will say is that I never set out to be a chef, ever. After working in the food business with my parents, I swore that I would never open a restaurant. And I actually never really cooked much growing up because, I had my mom and she always was the cook. My dad didn't want us experimenting on mlokhia and maklube. Like, he wanted what my mom made because he knows the flavors and the taste. He's like, I'm not here to be your taste tester. I want your mom's cooking.
Yeah, test it out
So
on the burgers, not on the
yeah. So, even my sisters, when they got married, like, they didn't even learn how to cook till after, because my dad wouldn't even let them practice before they left the house. So it's just like trial and error. But I started cooking when I moved to a very small town in Ohio, when I moved for a job that was even smaller than Toledo and did not have very much ethnic cuisine at all, except for like, Tex-Mex and Chinese, which you find in any small town. And I wanted, Thai food, and I wanted Indian food, and I missed my mom's food. And so I just started working in the kitchen, and it was abominable at some instances. The food was not very good at all, which is, my friends always say, like, there's no way you never knew how to cook this well. And I'm like, no, the reason I know how is because I practiced so much. It was a lot of trial and error. And then I moved to DC in 2017. And when I moved here, I noticed how important it was, because there were so many people from all over, and especially a lot of my friends who are from overseas who don't have any family here at all. We all kind of became each other's family. And I realized how important it was for us to have these home cooked meals that remind us of home. And I remember the first time I cooked a mlokhia for some of my friends, and then they tasted it, and like that look on their face, it was like almost Like they were almost in tears, and like that mouthful of food just brought them so much comfort, and it reminded them so much of home. And as soon as I saw that, I realized how important it was that the food that I'm making is not just sustaining our physical hunger, but also our emotional hunger. Because, you know, living far from your family, I think food for us is very central to a lot of our core memories growing up. And we've heard a lot of the other chefs on the podcast say that their food, when people taste it or smell it, it evokes all of these emotions of home. And so I started doing dinner parties, and like more and more people started hearing about them and wanting to come with their friends. And I lived in a house at the time and was sharing with a couple roommates, and I was able to host like 30, 40 people at a time. And during Ramadan and holidays, I would just invite all of these people over and just cook. I would cook for dozens of people. And during the pandemic, it got kind of lonely because I had no one to cook for because nobody could come over. And so I started, you know, my friends implored me to start an Instagram so that I could share my recipes, and I did. And so people started following, people started requesting cooking classes virtually. When things became safe, I started doing cooking classes one-on-one in person with people. And then in 2021, one of my favorite spots in DC, Green Zone, which is a Middle Eastern bar, but also has food and like space to host events, asked me to host a pop-up for Ramadan, because they do other pop-ups throughout the year, like a Hanukkah pop-up. They host other restaurants who are trying to launch. And I said, wow, I never really thought of that, you know? And I was like, okay, let's do it. And so I did it. The first year we served them sakhan wraps on their sage bread, and it was like a huge hit.
So delicious. Sounds amazing.
Sakhan, I mean, I have people now a year and a half later, still when they see me are like, I still think about the chicken from that day. And so it's just like, it was so amazing. It was so well received. I started getting like catering jobs from it. People asking me. And then I was going to host a second pop-up later in the year last year, but I got COVID. So like terrifying. I was afraid I was not going to get it back in time. And so I had to cancel it. But I hosted a second pop-up at Green Zone during Ramadan this year. So it's now become a tradition, and I feel like it's something I'm always going to do. And that, you know, these pop-ups at Green Zone, because it's more like a bar setting, they don't have tables. It's like individual courses. So I do individual courses. This year I did mini maklubas. I actually constructed little maklubas in a container and flipped them on each person's plate.
I was following that, and I remember seeing that, and I was like, oh, that looks so awesome and so delicious and so personal. It looked amazing.
I wanted everybody to experience makluba, you know, so how else would you do that individually? And it just turned out so well.
During
we
the
did like lamb
pandemic,
arayas for the appetizer.
Yeah, you can't have it in the whole, like, you know, the way that we serve it at gatherings, not during the pandemic. So yeah.
No. So yeah, I mean, it turned out so well. And this pop-up had double the amount from last year. So from 60 people to 120 people. Still don't know how I pulled it off. I had a lot of help, and I was very lucky that the staff at Zone was so accommodating. And then I was talking to one of my friends after the pop-up, and we were just kind of throwing things around. And I got to thinking that it's so nice to share our food as Palestinians with people, but I think a lot of what makes our food so good is also the entire experience that comes with it, which is what you experience when you're in someone's home. And that's where Bayti came from. You know, I always thought of like hosting dinner parties for my friends, and I love seeing everybody kind of sharing and talking and like passing around plates. But there was nothing like that in DC. There's a few Palestinian restaurants here, but it's still a restaurant. You give your order, you get an individual plate. But I was like, what if I created a concept where people could come? It would be like they were visiting my home, and I would basically serve them as if they were in my home, and everyone would sit around big tables. You would also get all the extras, right? You would get the juice when you walk in. So like we served like guava and mango juice at my pop-up a couple weeks ago.
You are listening to the Palestine in America podcast. Please consider supporting our work by becoming a subscriber or ordering individual copies of our print or digital magazine at PalestineInAmerica.com.
So it was covered by a couple of local DC media outlets, and I can't describe like the emotions of just seeing, Palestinian cuisine, like, making a debut in Washington, D.C. under this concept of Bayti. And to see how many people were so receptive to it was also very overwhelming, because as Palestinians, we know that our food has been appropriated and we are being erased as a people, like day by day. We're trying so hard to like hang on to it and fight back and like reclaim it. And to see how receptive people were to that, especially in an area like DC. There are so many Israeli restaurants that are claiming our food as their own. I see it every single day, and it's so frustrating to me. And I'm like, as an activist, it's in me obviously to like put it out there for people, like, don't go to this place, right? But what else can we do? And I think some of the other chefs we talked about it, we have to call our food Palestinian. Because if we don't call it Palestinian, it's very easy for them to take it and rename it as their own. Yeah. And so seeing like how many people actually came out and how many people approached me at the event and spoke to me about why they thought it was very important to support us, it was so meaningful, and it was beyond what I expected the concept to actually become.
Yeah, and what'd you serve this year? I don't know if you mentioned it already, but what'd you serve this year?
So this year I served like ruz hashwe, and I also served jaj mashwi. I used Z&Z's amazing spices. They gave me like all of the delicious spices to use. So shout out to Danny, who was also part of this project. I also served salata arabiya, which like that for me, you had to like, I had to put that on the menu because I don't know how many restaurants in DC call it Israeli salad, and I just, it's so annoying. And then we also did laban, but I also mixed my laban with like fresh garlic and lemon and dill. And then I had all of the accoutrements, like all the sides, and khalalat. I also did knafe with the orange blossom syrup. And fun fact I'm going to share with you, I had never made a knafe before in my life. Literally never once. My friends make it all the time because I'm always the one that's in charge of the food for my dinner parties. So my friends take care of dessert. Making the knafe during the event was the first time I made it. And people were telling me it was like the best knafe they ever had.
How stressful is that?
I don't even know what I did. I thought it actually wasn't that bad. I was like, listen, it can't taste bad. You know what I'm saying? When in doubt, just douse it in syrup. And it'll be
yeah.
But I think a lot of people, they complicate it. But if you just get the sweet cheese and then just use that, like you don't need anything else, honestly, because it melts and then it has the right amount of sweetness, and then you don't have to worry about mixing like the mozzarella with whatever and all that kind of stuff.
I'll take your word for it. I've never had a knafe.
What?
I said I'll take your word for it because I've never had a knafe.
You haven't?
No, I'm lactose intolerant.
I mean, but it's worth it. Come on, take a pill and just eat it.
No, that looks like it'll destroy me. Like there's just certain things like cheese pizza. There's just certain things that'll destroy me, and I just look at it going.
Listen, every Arab is lactose intolerant.
But get this: anytime I'm in Palestine, I have to take somebody to buy them a knafe. Like I can't.
Oh man! Oh, that's so nice of you.
It's like, no, just because I can't eat it, it's something that we have to do while we're on the trip. We end up doing it like 3 times on the trip.
That's hilarious. Oh, man.
But
yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I mean, yeah, so it was definitely, it was something.
And you obviously, you said earlier, you plan on doing it again.
Yes, I'm going to make it a series because I feel like, the response was so overwhelming. People were sending me messages, texting me, asking for tickets, like all last minute, especially after the articles about it came out. So I saw that there is definitely a need for this type of experience. And I just think DC is such a open city when it comes to like food that people are down for anything.
Yeah.
And I think that people really want a taste of true Palestinian hospitality, like, experiences. And the menu's going to change, obviously, and I want to serve things that my mom cooked for us growing up. So we're going to have mluchiyah, we're going to have zela, I'm going to make like msakhan, and hopefully if I have the energy one day I'll do warak. That's just too much work though.
And for a non-Arabic speakers, Bayti means my home. So that's why the whole, home feeling that's the whole purpose of the pop-up, to make sure that you get that. Like you were saying, you don't walk into anybody's house in Palestine and then you leave stuffed.
Yes.
You can't not eat. You walk in, you get juice, then you get shay, then you get kahwa, then you get
yeah, you get the nuts, you get the
And then by the time you're leaving, you're eating a kharoof. And
yes, always end up staying for dinner. It's so rude if you don't. And, everybody told me they ate so much at my pop-up and they just felt like so happy. And it's amazing the relationships that were also formed, because a lot of people were seated together randomly. One of the tables my friend was sitting at, and him and the other people at the table now have like this like weekly dinner club that they started.
Wow.
They get together and they go out and they, try restaurants and like hang out. I mean, it's amazing. It really is.
That's awesome. So Jinan, let's shift to the food edition that you curated. Take us through your thought process and why you highlighted who you highlighted and why you decided to go that direction. And
yeah, so this was something obviously that was in the works for a while. I think we talked about this initially for the first time like last year in the fall.
Yeah.
And so, this has been like a year in the making at this point. And, like life intervenes and, it was so hard to really think of like how I wanted to choose the people that I wanted to highlight, because, there's a lot of people who are already very successful in certain people's eyes. But at the same time, and as people will find out when they listen and read these interviews with these chefs, some of them, their success is very new, and it came after years and years of struggle. And as someone who obviously, I mean, I'm not going to open a restaurant. I will continue to say that. My friends think otherwise, but it's a lot of work, getting people to buy into your business, to also balance your identity. And so a lot of these chefs are people I came across either like through Instagram or through like other means. Other chefs told me about them. And, I wanted to highlight the diversity of experiences between all of these different Palestinian chefs. So you have someone who obviously has like a very successful, business, like Samir in San Francisco. He has 2 restaurants, but obviously hearing a story, you don't realize all of that baggage that went along with opening it. You also have Reem, who has her business, in LA. And for her, she also struggled a lot with the opening and dealing with identity ahead of time. But then you also have someone like Anan Zahr, who's the mother of one of my really good friends, Amir, who is a mom and a grandma who stays at home, but she cooks. And she's so passionate about like continuing to feed her family all of these amazing dishes that she grew up with from her parents, that she fed her kids and now is feeding her grandkids. And like, she doesn't have a very flashy Instagram. She doesn't create like these super like fancy reels or images, but it's just like very honest, it's like very day to day. Like today I'm making maklube for me and my husband, right? And then like, it's just like betinjan, and then she shows the rice, and then she shows the final product. And it's just like, you connect with that, regardless of whether or not it's like part of this new social media, like, influencer status. At the end of the day, she's making food that you can relate to. And I wanted to highlight that anyone, any age, any background, living anywhere can, be a chef technically. There is no way to define a chef, as my friend Rami would say, because he would always call me a chef and I'm like, I'm not a chef. And he's like, there's no institute, unless you go to the CIA, obviously, but not really. Anybody could be called a chef.
Yeah.
And so really, I wanted to highlight that you've got all of these people like Z and Z, who started off as like a, a pop-up at a farmer's market, then they had a food truck, and now they have a, you know, a restaurant. And then they have like this, you know, domestic, you know, business that ships like frozen menaish and spices all over the country. Their spices are in Whole Foods and all of these other grocery stores. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So I wanted to show the diversity of like who we are, you know, and also I wanted to highlight, you know, I mean, you've got men, you've got women, you've got like someone like Lulu who's in Brooklyn, who has an incredible story, beating cancer twice, you know, divorced mom, has twin kids, trying to make it on her own. I mean, I want people to understand that as Palestinians, we are, you know, we're dynamic, we're layered, we are not a monolith. We don't all share the same experience just because we're all in the diaspora, you know, just because we all grew up here or like lived here. And so kind of that's how I curated the list. I wanted to show the differences. I didn't want it all to be like a cookie cutter experience of every chef.
And I can, as someone who's edited the work and I've sat in on the interviews with you for the podcast episodes, these people are very dynamic. They each have a very unique story of how they came to the food industry, and their, like you said, their success and how they got there had a very all of them had interesting roads. The one person that I wish I knew more about was Anan. Even in her Q&A, she was very direct, and you described her as a direct person. I'm thinking like, yeah, I remember reading her Q&A. Her answers were direct and succinct, like straight to the point.
Yes.
If you don't mind sharing with the listeners one thing about each person that we've highlighted, and kind of what maybe is your favorite thing or most interesting thing you would say about what you learned about them during this process.
Ooh, let's see. Wow, that's a lot. You're putting me on the spot here because there's like so many people.
There is a ton of
I know. Okay, so I guess like we'll start Marcelle, who's our feature, and has become a very close friend of mine and is a chef in the DC area. I honestly was like very surprised when I read the interview questions about like how they made the decision to leave a Michelin star restaurant in DC, to be honest, right? I mean, like you would think that being a Michelin star chef would be like the highlight of anyone's career, but yet Marcelle turned around, stepped down from that role to make literally chicken and French fries. I mean, it's the best chicken and French fries, Msechan style chicken and za'atar fries, but you know, just seeing someone step into their own and then also at the same time, you know, becoming very, you know, comfortable with their identity as a trans-Palestinian, like all of that within like a year and a half. I mean, I knew bits and parts of their story, but I just never knew that everything kind of converged all at once for them. So that to me, out of Marcelle's story, was probably the most impactful piece of their history.
That shocked the hell out of me. And like we mentioned, we were talking with Samir, and I was, you know, referencing like making it to the major leagues. Like you're the head chef at a Michelin star restaurant. That's the major leagues of whatever it is you're doing. That's the, you know, like you said, and he did just say, you know what, I'm going to follow my dreams and this is what it is. And he made a really great thing out of it. I can't wait to try the chicken and the msechan.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited for the diner to finally come out.
And then there was Danny from Z&Z, who's also, I think, a friend of yours now too, right?
Yeah, so I met Danny last summer, actually. Obviously, I knew of the Z&Z family, you know, would go to the farmers markets and stuff, but we connected for the first time last summer through my friend Marwa here in DC. And we would always go and like, you know, stop by and get menaish and stuff. Danny, for like their whole family like story is so interesting, and I think one of the best things about their story is that they opened their manusha spot in their uncle and grandfather's fried chicken spot, like the exact same location, just like 30 years later. And I was watching the process of the renovation, was happening last year. And as they were tearing down walls and ripping up counters, they were finding all of these random photos from like back in the day that had slipped in, because the chicken shop had turned into some other business and another business. So like the fact that these photographs kind of like withstood the test of time was very interesting to me. But just to see how these brothers decided to just like go for it, you know? And it's like, for me as somebody who's grown up in the food business, like to get to that point where you just like, you know, you pull your lever and you just like, your parachute just pops open and you just are like, I'm doing this, right? And you just jump. And it's like, that takes a certain amount of like bravery and conviction, because you have to have so much, like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Faith?
Yeah, very much so, in yourself, in your product. I remember when Z&Z launched their frozen manouche, they did an event at Green Zone pre-pandemic, and they were starting to launch it in like, you know, the stores, where you just have like a pre-made frozen manouche, and then you take it home and then you can bake it. And it's literally fresh as if it just came out of their oven. Like I said, Danny sent me a bunch of them when I had COVID in October. Those saved me. Pop it in the oven for literally 5 minutes. Your house smells like your grandma's house.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
it's amazing. It's like mind blowing. How
That's,
do you create a product that amazing?
that's nuts.
So it's just like, just seeing the conviction that they have in their business and just like how determined they are.
And then there was also, why am I drawing a blank? Thank God for editing.
There's
we had
Lulu, obviously.
Lulu the baker. You mentioned a lot about her already. She fought cancer. She, like you said, she's divorced, mother of twins, and she just kind of accidentally, you know, fell into Lulu's gourmet crackers. Like, she fell into this amazing idea. And
Yep.
yeah, was that also your favorite part about her, that she just kind of fell into this?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I think it's hilarious that she literally was like, I just don't want my kids to be messy with zait and za'atar at the park, so let me make crackers. And then all the other kids like them, and then the parents were like, amazing. And I was like, okay, like this is so crazy that she said Snapchat started her business because she would post it and people wanted to, you know, they wanted to buy. And it's just like, it was so amazing to me.
Yeah. And then we had Reem from Reem's California, and I've been to her spot. You haven't, but what intrigued you the most? Because I hadn't heard the complete story about what she went through when she put up the mural of Rasmia in her restaurant. But to hear it directly from her, I didn't know she faced death threats and all of that.
I mean, yeah, so I got her cookbook in May, like for Eid. I had purchased it as a gift for myself. And she has like a whole section in there about that. And that part really, really moves me, as well as like the last paragraph in her cookbook. And, you know, yeah, I mean, like what, like, you know, what putting a mural of Rasmi is going to do when you put it on your wall. Like, you're literally just inviting at that point, but also like, it's like Jakarta, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to do this despite the fact that I know you're not going to like it. Like, that's not enough to deter me from wanting to put this iconic woman on my wall. And the fact is, she is, like she said, the mural, she's smiling. It's like, she's so benevolent, and she's like looking down at the bakery and like bestowing like her just grace and her beauty and her strength. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
yeah, for me, Jakarta is the best word to describe it. Her putting,
and it's so hard to describe, you know, translate it to English, but it's Jakarta, right?
If you're not an Arabic speaker, reach out to an Arabic friend and they just have them explain.
See if they can try to translate it. It's really hard to translate some of these phrases, but like, it's true. Like, she literally was just like, she could have put anyone else up there.
Honestly, yeah.
She could have put like Ahed Tamimi or, you know, anybody
Somebody
else.
more palatable, yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like a young Palestinian girl, whatever. But no, she put Asmia Oda, somebody that was literally like deported and was like, in jail, and someone that had so much controversy around her. And, she did end up getting all these Zionists pushing back. But like she mentioned in the podcast, that only made it better.
Yeah.
It brought her a lot more attention.
Backfired on them. Yeah, literally.
Of course.
It's kind of how
you're on the right side of history, you're always going to come out on top.
Exactly. It's kind of how me and some of my friends, we joke about Canary Mission being more of a resume for great activists. Like, hey,
right?
For a great activist to hire at your organization, go to Canary Mission.
I mean, honestly, like her taking that step is just, it's so inspiring. And I feel like it's going to inspire other Palestinians that come after her to not shy away from these so-called controversial figures, right?
Yeah. Because you see a lot of people, as soon as like Palestinians resist anything outside of non-violently, it's like, oh no, even our non-violent resistance gets pushed back. So it's like, why even hinder any of it? Resist. That's
exactly what I tell people all the time.
Yeah, they're gonna hate no matter how we resist. So just resist no matter whatever tool you have, whether it's your voice or you're actually in the resistance and you got the biggest cojones of us all. Cool. But for us that can't really do that, we're gonna cook and we're gonna write and we're gonna do interviews and we're gonna bring awareness to it all. And then there was also, we talked about Anan, and she's actually the mother of Anan Zahr. I didn't know that. I assume she was related.
Yes, she is. And fun fact, Ahmed is also a wonderful cook. For people that don't know, he's cooked for me a few times, and he very much is a very good cook. During the pandemic, actually, that was like one of the things that he focused on a lot, was like experimenting with recipes. But yeah, him and his mom actually cooked together for like some Palestine conferences.
Yeah, sometimes I see that he's doing that, like that tour, that
Palestine Comedy Festival.
And I think that's the coolest thing he could possibly do. Just take our comedians from here and some comedians out there and go on a tour out there. I think that's pretty awesome. And then I believe was there one other person?
There was Samir.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about him too, and his story is even crazier. I was describing to him as like his first like couple years in the industry as like being in the minor leagues of being in the food industry, like doing all the grunt work, and inshallah, like convincing his dad to let him take over his shops. Listen, my Arab dad is very hard-headed. I love him to death. It would take,
all of them are.
I think so. I'm just, so I don't want to, there might be a few out there like, I'm an Arab dad and I'm not that hard-headed, but
just wait till
Janine becomes a teenager.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I digress. But yeah, so to do that, I mean, that was very impressive in itself as well. And God, it just really, like, just talking about him to end it, you really did. I mean, you went from coast to coast. You have the East Coast represented pretty well. You got the West Coast. Is there anybody from the Midwest? Did you forget the Midwest? Oh, I feel hurt.
I mean,
it's okay.
It is what it is.
See, no, that's what's gonna happen.
I mean, I guess maybe you could consider Anna Midwest-ish, Pennsylvania. Well, she's Philly, so no, it's not Midwest.
Yeah, no, like you can't take.
If she was Pittsburgh, I would say maybe because it was closer, but
no, it's okay. I'll be our representative, just me.
There you go. There's the Midwest, and I'm technically Ohio, right?
Yeah. You know what?
DC so long. I'm in DC. I've been here for 5.5 years, but I'll let you have it.
No, you're Ohioan. You're Midwestern. Yes, thank you. You see, good job. You represented the whole goddamn country.
Yes, exactly. We have so much talent in our community, to be honest. I mean, it's absolutely unreal. And one thing I love about Palestine in America is the fact that you are highlighting sports and music and fashion and food and act. I mean, like, we're everywhere. People really need to recognize, like, we are not.
And that's why I started doing the editions, Jinan, because, like, shit, I'm like, let me just hyper focus these people and put them together. Because, like, there's people out there that are playing sports. They're like, what other Palestinians are playing sports? Now they pick up the sports edition, and now they got people that they can put in their circle, maybe train with, maybe help exceed in their field because you know things that maybe other people don't. And we could honestly make 100 food editions. We can make 100 music editions, and inshallah we do. But this is the first food edition, and I think you did a fantastic job.
Thank you. Yeah,
Before
it's been great.
Before I let you go, people will listen to the other episodes, and you kind of gave a hint at these answers, but I got to ask you anyway. Malfouf or warak?
Warak.
Nana or maramiya?
Maramiya overall, but I do mix it.
Yeah, you did. You told me that. I still got to give that a try. I'm going to try it tonight.
You have to try it. It's delicious.
I'll let you know right away. Maklub or msakhan? I edited this question because I got called out by Lulu.
Msakhan for sure. I mean, that my mom will always make that for me when I come home because it is like hands down. And like from her hands, it is so different than what I can make.
Okay. And
yeah.
So what's your Palestinian food hot take?
Bamia is not bad, guys. It's actually very delicious. I don't care. I will die on this hill. I love bamia. It is so good. You have to try the technique I use because it does not make it slimy. I know people have an issue with the texture. I don't like to use like the little baby frozen okra that our parents used to use and dump it and cook it in the mara'a. You really have to actually, I use either like fresh okra, or if it's frozen, I will actually roast it, because once you roast